Welcome. Week 2 of online only Sangha. I'm here alone at Against the Stream in Venice for the regular Monday night meditation class. Thank you for joining me, or perhaps watching it later. Going through the Against the Stream book. And tonight's topic is death and understanding death and Buddhist perspective on the impermanence of the physical body, the inevitability of death. So I have a bunch of reflections about death for us tonight, and a meditation on death and the body as a impermanent vehicle, as a corpse. It feels like a timely, maybe always timely, to think about death, something that we should be somewhat constantly, regularly reflecting on. Especially with what's happening in the world today with pandemic and coronavirus, COVID-19, and the extra deaths, a new way to die, and a whole world coming together on some level or another, trying to minimize the amount of deaths and the process of deaths and access to healthcare and all of the issues that are creating this beginning with encouraged and now forced in most places self-isolation. And always kind of reminding ourselves that this is all about trying to save some lives and not overwhelm the healthcare systems, because that will actually result in the loss of life. And, one of the ways that I was looking at the chapter earlier, and I started with this very common Buddhist quote, where the Buddha says, death is inevitable. It's guaranteed. We know for sure that we are going to die. What we don't know is when. It's uncertain. We don't know how long this incarnation is going to last. We do know that there's a maximum. We know statistically what the average human lifespan is going to be. We know that keeps increasing. That kind of with current science and medicine, and that worldwide human lifespan is increasing, but that still death is certain, and the time of death is unknowable, is uncertain. So I have a bunch of reflections on death tonight, and maybe you're already reflecting quite a bit on death, and I know that there's a lot of anxiousness in the world about the coronavirus and people being afraid of contracting it and possibly dying, knowing that some small percentage of people that contract the coronavirus will die. And even though it's a small percentage, it's still a lot of people. And so we're in this situation where a few months ago, we thought, oh, there's all of these ways that I could die. And this wasn't on the list. And now this is a new one that's on the list. Oh, I could get this disease that there's not a treatment for yet, and I could possibly die from this. So reflecting for yourself on your relationship to death. How do you feel about dying? What do you think happens when you die? Do you have some belief systems? Have some ideas about an afterlife? Most of us as Westerners were conditioned with an eternalist view of existence, told something like you have a soul or a spirit. If you had any sort of religious conditioning, you had told something like you have a soul, you have a spirit, and you live this lifetime, and then you were eternally going to go on to another realm of existence, hell or heaven or some kind of afterlife experience. Some of us are living with a mind that was conditioned not with eternalism, but rebirth and reincarnation. And so checking in, do you believe in rebirth? Do you believe in reincarnation? Do you think that there's something happening here that exists beyond this body? Is the perspective that you have a karmic momentum that continues beyond this lifetime, that has existed in previous lifetimes and will continue? Does that make sense to you? Do you have some faith in that? Or I think many people in our community, in the Western Buddhist sanghas, have taken what's sometimes referred to as secular Buddhist approach, and are dismissing the Buddhist teachings on rebirth, and have decided that since science can't prove it, that it doesn't make sense to them, and have taken on a view of just this one lifetime. This is all we have, just now. And that when this body dies, it's lights out, and that there were worm food that were... and I think that even some people who don't believe in rebirth or any sort of after existence beyond this body, at least understand that there's some energy that this body carries. As science says, energy can not be created or destroyed. The four elements will continue back into the earth, and the water that this body is made of will evaporate and become part of the environment again, so that there's some continued existence of the physical elements of the body, if not a spiritual or momentum that continues. So you get to look at your own mind, look at your own heart. and see what your ideas about it are. And do you have some fixed ideas, some rigid, for sure it's like this. The Buddha said it's like this, so it's like this. Or do you have a bit more, I don't know. I don't know what happens when we die. Maybe it's lights out. Maybe there's a continued existence. Not sure. Not certain. So take a moment to just look at your mind, and just as we start to talk about and you reflect that this body that right now you can be mindful of how very much alive it is. All of the signs of life, the breath, the heart beating, the mind thinking. It says, yes, still alive. Breathing in, still alive. Breathing out, still alive. I can see, I can hear, I can smell, I can taste. Thinking, emotions, all of the signs of life are present. Here I am. And what do we believe? What do we think about that? I do have a sense that whether we believe in reincarnation or not, it's not that important. That practicing Buddhism certainly doesn't demand a belief in rebirth. That you can, like all of the Dharma, all of the Buddhist teachings, you can find out for yourself. It's okay to set it aside, to have your own ideas and even have differing views than some of what the traditional Buddhist teachings are. It's fine. I do think that it's important for all of us on a path of transformation to have an open-minded kind of a possibility that what we think isn't true. Some, I guess, a basic humility of like, well, I think this about death, but I could be wrong. And looking at where did I learn my ideas about death. And I'm happy to admit that reincarnation, I've been studying and practicing Buddhism for over 30 years, and the Buddha, all of it says reincarnation, rebirth. This is what's happening here. And so I don't have 100% faith that that's for sure what's happening. I have some openness, some maybe an agnostic feeling of like, I don't know. But I lean towards believing in reincarnation. And I can look at my mind, I can look at my life, my conditioning, and remember that I was taught that reincarnation was true from early childhood. My father believed in reincarnation. He worked with dying patients, hospice and death and dying. Death was normalized for me in a way that I don't think it is for many children. And I was taught that there was reincarnation. So I have that conditioning, which I question. I don't want to believe it, but it's a bit easier for me to at least have a maybe or a probably there's something going on here beyond this physical form existence. So anyways, my feeling is you have to see, many people are battling being raised by atheists that said, lights out, being raised by, Judeo-Christian or Hindu eternalists who said, no, you exist forever. And the Buddha says, oh, no, we exist. We're this process, we're this karmic momentum from lifetime to lifetime. until we free ourselves from greed and hatred and delusion. And that when we free ourselves, when we end the causes of suffering, there is no more rebirth. We end the cycle of being reborn when we enter what is referred to as the deathless, that part of us that will never die again. There's a place in the teachings that just came to mind that I really love, where it talks about the preciousness of this human rebirth, where we've taken birth, and that all of us right now are having such a precious human rebirth because we've taken birth into a form, into a generation, into a culture, into a life's experience that got us introduced to the Dharma. Everyone that's listening to this, you've been introduced to a transformational path, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, this path that can lead to the deathless. The third noble truth is it is possible to end rebirth, to end suffering, to never have to die again. Rather than dying over and over and over, to end death. And that by the time we've taken this precious human rebirth, it says in one of the suttas, we've died so many times, countless times, endless deaths, that we've bled as much blood as in all of the rivers of the world. We've cried as many tears for all of the death, for all of the loss that we've experienced, as much tears as the oceans of this planet. So there's just this kind of a lot. You've died a lot. You've bled. You've cried. You've died so much, and you've taken birth now. And of course, you're subject to death here again. Or you can get free. You can end the cycle of wandering in samsara. Samsara, the Buddhist word for this world that we're in, this human realm, the animal realm. Also in samsara, there's these unseen realms of hungry ghosts and jealous gods and heaven realms and hell realms. And that we just keep coming back. The Buddhist perspective is we keep coming back. We keep suffering. We keep dying until we free ourselves from what's creating this returning. This clinging that's creating the returning, that's creating the suffering, and that we can get free. And, decades ago, I heard these teachings and I was suffering so much, and I said, I want to stop suffering. I want to get free. And I continue now, so many years into it, to still feel like, yes, of course, I want to be free from the suffering, from the cycle of birth and death. When we are in denial about impermanence, when we are in a delusion about death, when we're afraid of it, when we're ignoring it, when we're not turning towards death, then often we can lose our motivation. We can think, hey, life is pretty good. I think that one of the and life is pretty good. Life can get really beautiful and really, you start to get some equanimity, some peace. Life gets quite good. I think one of the ways to see the coronavirus pandemic as a wake-up call, and a lot of people are saying this and thinking about this. I know you're already a wake-up call of our fragility, our impermanence, susceptibility to viruses, to disease, to death. And how not only for ourselves, but how we can put others at risk, how our behaviors can literally kill other people. I was thinking about death, and I said this, I think, last week about how there's a new way to die. So I did a little bit of research today on online. I was curious how many people already die every day. How many people? Because we're talking, when you start looking at, coronavirus is happening and this many more people are going to die and this many people are going to get it and this percentage of them are going to die. I'm just curious about what's that going to add to the death toll, the death rate. So the numbers that I came up with, and the internet is, this was from some look like reputable World Health statistics. What I found, and I think this is statistics a couple years old, but that 55.3 million people die every single year. 55.3 of us leave the body annually. And I believe that, with coronavirus, it will increase that number this year, 2020. That means that 151,600 people die every day. That 6,316 people die every hour. So just as we're meditating tonight, we have this class for about an hour and a half. Over 7,000 people will die as we're, those of you who are alive with me. 7,000 people will die while we're meditating, while we're reflecting on this. And I want to come back to this, but we're on this planet where, life is precious and there is an abundance of resources. Out of the 150,000 people that died today and every single day, 25,000 people a day die because of starvation and the diseases related to starvation, to not having enough food, not having clean water, the diseases that children are prone to. It's like 9,000 or 10,000 children die every single day because of not necessarily that they starved to death, but because they did not have the malnutrition. They didn't have the appropriate food to be healthy, so that when they got viruses or measles or some of these diseases, that a healthy child can survive, that those who did not have proper nutrients and nourishment, children dying every single day on this planet. So please check in with your body. Bring some mindfulness, like just listening to, turning towards death. What's happening in your belly? What happens in your chest, in your shoulders, in your jaw? Where do you tense up if you do? Can you soften into this conversation, this reflection on death and impermanence and loss and grief. And perhaps even feelings of guilt. Sometimes we look at our lives and we think about all of the abundance that we have, and we look around the planet and see people, 25,000 people starving to death every day. And then there can be a feeling of sadness about it, compassion, and perhaps some feelings of guilt. Or hopefully we can reframe that as a desire to help, a desire to be of service. But first we have to turn towards it. We have to stop denying the reality that we live in. So I'll come back to the talk. I'd like to meditate with you. And in the mindfulness teachings, the seventh factor of the Eightfold Path, the Buddha says, here's this path to freedom. Understand reality as it is, which is part of what this conversation is aimed at. Develop healthy, wise, positive intentions. And behave with our speech, with our actions, with our livelihood in a way that is not creating negative karma for us, not causing harm, trying not to. And then the effort that it takes to develop mindfulness and concentration to see clearly and respond appropriately. So in the seventh factor of the mindfulness, the four foundations of mindfulness from the Buddha, he says, meditate, sit, do a sitting meditation practice, and turn your attention inward and feel the breath coming and going. And understand that this body, be mindful of this body as the four elements, that this body is made of the earth. This body is almost 80% water element. This body that we are in, that we are inhabiting, has the heat element, fire, warmth. It's 98 degrees in here. And the air element, each breath, this body is porous. The skin breathes, the lungs breathe. This whole body is breathing organism. The blood oxygenated. He says, reflect on this body as 32 parts. Meditate, be mindful that this body has hair and skin and nails and bones and all of the different organs, and that it's fluids, and that it's sinews and ligaments and cartilage and teeth. And see this body for what it is, as the many, many component parts that we are. Not just a body, but a body that is made up of skin and flesh and bones, organs. And then in the first foundation, after the mindfulness of breath and body and four elements and 32 parts, the Buddha says, now meditate on death. Meditate on this inevitable process of death and decay. And so that's what we'll do tonight. We'll have it's called a corpse meditation. So important to turn towards death. Here in Los Angeles, we just spent a year with the Sangha. 50 people started this Year to Live practice. And we finished, I think just last month we finished. We started it last year. We did 12 months of turning towards death, investigating death. Such a powerful and important part of our spiritual life. in Seattle. Many of our Sangha up there at Rebel Saints are just coming to the end of their year to live practice. And they just have, I think, a couple weeks left. We finish in first week in April. And what an interesting time for this pandemic, for the people who have been, for the last 11 and a half months turning towards death. And now this major shift in our world, in our culture, in our awareness around sickness and aging and death. Here's what I want to also say. Of course, death is inevitable, of course. And I believe we should live as long as possible. What we're doing here, from a Buddhist perspective, what we're doing here as human beings is trying to get free from the causes of suffering and trying to use our life to help others, to alleviate suffering. So the longer we can do that, the better. So yes, death is certain, it's inevitable, and there's all of this life that we have, and maybe 80 years on average, 80 something on average. And so we plan for a long life on some level or another and do all of the things to sustain the body, the life in this body, so that we can meditate, so that we can practice generosity, so that we can be kind, we can be loving, we can try to wake up, we can help others, we can create a positive change on this planet. So Buddhism, although it's very much about seeing clearly the truth of impermanence and death, it's very much life affirming. It's very much about live fully, embody and engage with life because it's so precious. We have this opportunity for this life. We've taken this precious human rebirth, and we can do amazing things with our life. Whether that's your internal transformation or your external service engagement, both, hopefully. A couple of thoughts that that have helped me around thinking about death. There's this teaching from Ajahn Chah where he holds up a glass and he says everything is impermanent, and I really appreciate this glass that I have, but to me, I understand its impermanence and that it's already broken. And so I enjoy every moment with it. Because the more that we understand impermanence, the more we understand the preciousness and the uncertainty of whether we'll get more time with that person, or more time for our practice, or more time for being present for our children, or whatever it is. So it brings preciousness and life and mindfulness to what we're doing. My father, in his book, Who Dies, he took that teaching from Ajahn Chah and he said, what if we apply this already broken, the glass is already broken, enjoy your time with it. What if we apply that to life? We know we're going to die eventually. What if we start looking at you're already dead? That your children are already dead. It's inevitable that your friends are already dead. That you know it's going to happen eventually. So the glass is already broken. Our loved ones are already dead. And bring that much more preciousness, that much more love, that much more compassion to each other when we see the impermanence, rather than the complacency that we sometimes bring to our self, to our practice, to our relationships. Death as a wake-up call to be more and more present for what's happening as it's happening. And I just, I feel like this responsibility for each of us to look at our lives, and that our spiritual life is not just, are we good at sitting in meditation? That there is a physical component to our spiritual practice. And, what we eat is important. How we move our body is important. How we think is important. What we digest, what we consume, what we watch, what we listen to, what we read, like all of that is making up this body, which is why it makes it so important to study the Dharma, to listen to Dharma talks, to practice. When I was looking at the statistics on death, one of the things I came across was death rates in America. And in the U.S., I forget what the number of yearly deaths was. It's 55.3 million on the planet. I forget what the U.S. share of that 53 million was, but they give a list of the 10 ways that top 10 ways that we die in the U.S. And number one, and most of you probably already know this, is heart disease, which is almost fully diet. What do we eat that kills us, that gives our heart disease? Diet and exercise. That the one way people are dying in this culture is based on how we eat. Number two is cancer. And I don't have certainly there are people who believe that they know what causes cancer, and it does seem like there's some environmental factors and, sometimes maybe some emotional factors, but we don't really know what causes cancer. Number three, and I feel this one, number three, the third most deaths every year is about accidents. And, actually I had this big motorcycle accident last year, and I often think about this when I'm out on my motorcycle. And number three way that people die. And as I was looking into that, and they said, and most of this is like drunk driving accidents and, people not just taking risks, but taking risks not in their right mind, intoxicated. Number four is respiratory. Number five is stroke. 6 is Alzheimer's. Number 7 is diabetes. And of course, some people are born with diabetes, but the majority are the people that create diabetes for themselves based on diet, I believe. Number 8 is influenza, is the flu. And number 9 is kidney disease. Number 10 is suicide. And it's thousands and thousands of people take their own lives every year. And then some would say that actually the heart disease and drunk driving and stuff like that is its own other form of suicide, eating ourselves to death or drinking ourselves to death, addiction. I forgot to look up the statistic for how many overdose deaths there are every year and alcoholism deaths every year, but it's a staggering amount of the ways that we kill ourselves. In my early life, I was suicidal. I didn't want to exist. And that's just shifted so much for me as I began to practice the Dharma. As I started to get some freedom from the suffering that I didn't want to experience in my childhood, and that led to addiction. But then recovery, Dharma practice, brought me to a place a long time ago where I was like, I really want to exist. I want to exist. I want to get free. I want to see clearly. I want to learn to respond more wisely. And then having children changes the whole game. I have two, my children. I so much want to be present. And I feel like there's this healthy, of course we want to, and there's a reality of it's not certain. It's not guaranteed. And so we live with that awareness of, I want to be here in my relationships, for my family, for my friends, for my community. And it's not certain whether we'll get to be there. Probably yes. But we can't cling to it. And that there's a desire between wanting and needing. Wanting and clinging are two very different feelings. The difference of how it feels when you're like, I have to, rather than I want to, and we'll see. I expect to survive, and we'll see how much longer we survive. We don't know. Maybe I'll just end with this. I reflected a little bit earlier about framing this coronavirus huge shift in our lives, staying at home. I'm not even going to get into the financial impact on a lot of us, and probably most of us, and the whole culture, from shutting down all of the businesses, and but just the personal. Is sticking with the personal relationship to death and to impermanence and to the fears of, am I going to get this thing? Am I going to die? Am I, at first we were hearing like, oh, well, children, it's not really affecting children that much. Healthy children are going to be fine if they get it. Most people are going to be fine. And then my ex-wife sent me a thing this morning saying, hey, there's a 12-year-old girl in ICU who was healthy, no pre-existing conditions. We need to be more and more careful with our kids. It's getting scarier, and she's having that healthy fear around. We need to protect our children as much as we can. And so just landing in this place of like, of course, let's do what we can. Social distancing, yes. Staying at home for the most part, yes. Doing all of that. Trying to reframe this as an opportunity for retreat, for spiritual, stay at home, practice mindfulness, tune in to all of the, what a amazing opportunity to check out all of these groups that are doing meditation and yoga online and exercise online. And it's like this retreat practice. Not everybody knows how to do that. Those of us who've done meditation retreats really have a kind of visceral memory and ability to like, oh, I know how to not touch people. I know how to be alone. I know how to be quiet. I know how to, just be. And a lot of people are just learning that. They don't have that. They don't have a meditation practice. So we're so fortunate in this time to have these tools. And to be able to reflect on the inevitability of impermanence and death and be at ease with it, even if you're not at ease yet. But moving towards accepting reality as it is, as they say in recovery, life on life's terms. As Ajahn Sumedho says, right now it's like this. Wow, it's like this. I'm all alone, or just with my friends, or just with my family, no longer connecting socially like I used to. I've also heard all of these cool stories about people reaching out to people that you haven't spoken to in a long time. And making amends or asking for forgiveness, offering forgiveness. With this sort of like, I might not have time. It's a central part of the year to live practice that we do, which is if you're going to die in a year, who do you need to forgive? Who do you need to contact with some appreciation or bring into your meditation and send appreciation to? All of the people that have been so kind, so supportive of us over the years. So use this time, my encouragement, and I'm trying to do it and myself, use this time to deepen our practice, deepen our spiritual awareness, to turn towards our relationship to death and permanence, loss, to work with the fear, to stay in our body, stay present. Right now it's like this. I'm here. It feels like this. It's calling for compassion. It's calling for forgiveness. And it's sometimes calling for appreciation and joy and, turning on the music and dancing around by yourself or with others and having some fun. It's said that the Buddha's first teaching, often when he came into contact with people, was a teaching of generosity. Before even teaching people to meditate or about ethics or even the Four Noble Truths, at first he would say, our human tendency is to be so attached and so clingy. And we suffer so much about that. Learn to give. He said if you knew the importance of generosity, you wouldn't let a single meal go by without sharing some of your resources, some of your food with those who are hungry. And again, as I reminded us tonight, 25,000 people a day die around issues around nutrition and starvation. And so we can all just see, how can I help? How can I be of service? How can I share some of my resources, my time, my energy? How can I be generous with my life? And I know it's getting quite tenuous as we don't work and as, so many of us don't know how we're going to pay the rent and pay the, mortgages or whatever situation you're in, or continue to afford the businesses that you're running. So, there's a healthy sense of concern. And maybe right now is not the time to be giving away all of your resources. And sometimes we have to say, I need to take care of some of my expenses to be able to get through this difficult time. But still, find ways to give, find ways to be of service, and reach out to people that are alone and just say, how you doing? That's an act of generosity. I'll leave it there tonight. I believe that most of you are aware that Against the Stream is supported by the generosity, the donations of the people who tune in or attend. So if you can, please leave donations, just so that we can pay the rent here if possible. And but really take good care of yourself. Practice. It's all practice. And we're going to add some morning meditations to the Against the Stream live streams. I'm going to start on this Wednesday morning. I'm going to do a 9 a.m. Pacific time. So if you're on the East Coast, you can catch that at noon. And if you're in Europe, you can catch it at, the evening, 6 p.m. in the evening or so for you in Europe. So if you know people that want to tune into these live streams that are on the East Coast or in Europe, let them know that we're going to start, I think maybe 5 days a week. We're going to have morning, 9 a.m. Live stream meditations. I'll do Wednesday. Jason Siff is going to do Thursday. I believe Jason Murphy is going to do Fridays. And then we're working out We already have Sundays. Rachel Savage up in Seattle does Sunday mornings, and we're going to fill out the schedule, but and we'll send something out. We'll post something on social media about it. But just so that you know, we're adding that morning and evening practice from Against the Stream teachers. Thank you for your practice tonight. See you soon.